Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, December 5th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I am glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, what individuals and businesses can expect when the tax filing window opens in just a few weeks. Plus, the VA's size and complexity may be keeping top tech minds away, and veterans pay the price. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. This year continues to be a challenging one for the federal workforce. While federal offices reopened and hundreds of thousands of federal workers went back to work after the longest shutdown in history, many say nothing is back to normal. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis has more from an exclusive Federal News Network survey. Hi, Anastasia. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Terry.
Tell us first about how Federal News Network conducted the survey and how many people responded.
Yeah, so we conducted the survey last month, and we asked federal workers about what it has been like going back to work after this longest shutdown. We had about 1,500 people respond to this survey.
And what did folks say they were dealing with as they were trying to recover from the shutdown?
Most described the experience of returning to work as overwhelming and disorienting. They're digging out of thousands of emails. They're dealing with IT issues because devices become inactive after 30 days of non-use. They're still trying to log into certain systems. Federal workers who were furloughed said that they're trying to figure out what's going on with their projects and catch up with partners who kept working during the shutdown. Many say the experience has been confusing because there is little to no guidance from top management. But more importantly, and this is the sentiment that I got from a lot of people, is that employee morale is continuously sinking. One worker said, as if morale wasn't already non-existent, it sure is now. And workers are just saying that this has already been an extremely challenging and trying year, and the shutdown has made it even worse.
These are really emotions behind a lot of the headlines that we saw during the shutdown. How are these disruptions impacting agencies' ability to get back on track? As you say, they don't just flip a switch.
Yeah, we asked federal workers how long they think it would take them to catch up on all the work they missed during the shutdown. And almost 50% of people said it would take them more than 2 weeks to dig out of that. One employee said that their program was halted immediately and it would take more than 2 months to ramp it back up. Several people said that their agencies will most likely face budget cuts due to not being able to hit mandatory spending benchmarks, which is pretty much impossible after a 40-plus day lapse in appropriations. Some workers said that their agencies are still waiting on funds, so they can't actually start any work. And then many workers said that can you really catch up? Some of the work will just be lost. It will be just deprioritized in all this chaos. And given that there is a looming threat of another shutdown, many are just hesitant to dive back into work.
One of the other big impacts on morale certainly is pay, and a lot of folks didn't get paid during the shutdown. For those who have, how long did it take them to get their back pay?
We had about 45% of respondents say that it took them more than 7 days to receive their back pay. In previous shutdowns, it took only a couple of business days to receive their back pay. However, a lot of respondents say that they're still waiting on their back pay. One Air Force civilian at Lackland Air Force Base, for example, told me this week they received an update this Monday that the controller squadron is working to manually process over 3,000 time cards. So they're still waiting. And I had people across the federal government reach out and say that they're still waiting on their back pay 3 weeks after their shutdown was over.
That's definitely not something we're hearing from the headlines. So really appreciate getting that perspective. And as we come into the holidays, pay is just one facet of personal wellness, financial wellness, family wellness. How did the shutdown impact these respondents personally?
We had more than 50% of employees said that they experienced financial challenges during the shutdown. Nearly a third said that they struggled to pay bills. About 51% of federal workers said that they had to rely on credit cards, loans, or emergency savings to pay their bills. And we had about 14% of people who said that they were struggling with mortgage, rent, and other payments. About 10% of workers said that they needed outside assistance like food banks or relief programs. But more importantly, we had 62% of people say that the shutdown impacted their mental health. People said that they were dealing with constant dread and worry and the feeling of absolutely no protection.
Anastasia, were there responses that told you what the impact of that whole emotional situation is? Does it make people reconsider federal service?
Yeah, about 43% of workers said that this actually did make them reconsider staying in federal service. Those who were able to retire said that this solidified their decision. Those who can't retire just yet, they said that they're actively looking for a way out and that it has just become completely untenable to stay to work for their agency. Many workers who have been in the federal government for years or decades say that this has been the worst professional year of their career.
Anastasia, when you get to the bottom of all of this, did people say anything about what they really want the administration to know about how they're feeling or how their work is getting done?
One sentiment that I heard from a lot of respondents was that the shutdown was pretty cruel and petty and ultimately proved to be irrelevant to either side achieving their stated goals.
Well, that's a tough place to leave it.
Absolutely.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thank you for bringing us this information and sharing these stories with us today.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the VA's size and complexity may be keeping top tech minds away, and veterans are paying the price. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. VA's outdated infrastructure and regional silos make care coordination painfully slow, especially for mental health. Sean O'Connor, Navy veteran and co-founder and chief strategy officer at DexCare, is here to explain why modernization is urgent and how real-time access could transform veteran care. Sean, thanks so much for joining me today.
Terry, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
You have spent a lot of time on the Hill lately talking to lawmakers about ways the VA could modernize access to care. Tell us both what your message is and what you're hearing from the lawmakers.
Yeah. And maybe before that, Terry, just to touch on why we think this is so important or why personally it's so important to me. And then thank you again for having us and looking forward to having this conversation today. So just at the start, I'm a third generation veteran. Both my grandfathers fought and served in World War II, one in the Pacific, one in Europe. My father and my uncles all served during the Vietnam era, and I'm a 9/11 vet and served during 9/11. So since the 1940s, my family has been, leaning on and relying on the VA for all kinds of support and care. So it's a mission and it's an institution that's very important to me personally and very important to the fabric of our country. So I think it's no surprise the VA has struggled, being in the early forefront of EHR modernization or adoption to kind of being a laggard now in kind of EHR modernization. There's 9 million vets that really struggled to get access to timely care for some of the services they need as the VA works to modernize. So we've been spending a lot of time just talking to some of the leadership in the Hill around the momentum that seems to be building to try to modernize finally and kind of make access to care easier for veterans and trying to make sure that as community care grows and the VA and veterans have more options to seek care both inside and outside the VA, that we really move the needle on reducing time to care and improving efficiency of care delivery for veterans. So that's where we're trying to, spend time talking to the folks in SVAC and the Hill about and learn about some of the strategies people are trying to implement when it comes to the Dole Act and some of the other things that people are trying to advance when it comes to improving access to care for veterans. And really, we're a small technology company that focuses on healthcare access, and we're just trying to support improving access to care for veterans wherever and whenever we can, because it's a really important institution. It's the largest health system in our country, and it's probably one of the most outdated when it comes to the complexity of modernizing care for scheduling and finding appointments for veterans. And there's a lot of things that I think we can do to help the VA as they work to improve some of those services.
You've said that the VA was built for the last century, and you just mentioned the electronic health record that the VA has spent billions of dollars on and still doesn't have an operational system. What would you recommend in terms of practice for modernizing some of those administrative functions of the VA?
Yeah, it's complicated. So I'm not suggesting this isn't complicated. The VA has gone through 4 different attempts to try to modernize and is still not successful yet in trying to get to the end goal of, improving access to care for veterans and having a global view of care. So I think the first thing we've been talking to folks about is today everything works in silos, and it's tough to leverage the size and sophistication of the VA caregivers when everything's in silos. And there's close to 130 different Vista instances, a growing number of Oracle instances. And one of the leaders we talked to the VA last time we were in DC said that the complexity of VA care delivery is beyond human comprehension. Just how customized each of those Vista instances are. They're all unique Snowflake. They don't talk to each other. They don't share inventory. One of the visits we're talking to now about a project, so there's roughly 10,000 appointments that go unutilized every month in his hospital because these different EHR instances don't talk to each other. So one of the first things we're talking about is trying to break down those data silos to bring all the supply and all the demand into one queue. And this is what we do for some of the other largest health systems in the country, Kaiser and other folks, where we take this global view of inventory, and then you can use AI and some of these sophisticated navigation tools that have been built in the digital age of healthcare since the pandemic, start to look at how you load balance that network a little more efficiently, how you share resources, how you improve internal utilization, improve efficiency, and reduce care gaps across board. So I think until the VA finds a way through either a massive conversion to a centralized EHR or finding ways to work with technology entrepreneurs and vendors that can break down some of these data silos, they'll continue to have the problem of trying to transition to a large EMR system in Oracle, and through that process still have these 130 other systems and up to 24 different scheduling solutions that have been customized across the various VISNs, none of them working together, none of them sharing information across each other. So you have the largest health system in the country, 9 million veterans and their family members that we're supposed to be providing care for, and none of this stuff talks to each other to share capacity, to share utilization, to share best practices. It's a very fragmented, siloed, and complicated environment. So until we find ways to break down those silos and leverage the power of tech and data to kind of level that playing field, it's going to be very difficult to move anything in a substantial manner, we think.
I'm speaking with Sean O'Connor. He's a Navy veteran and co-founder and chief strategy officer at DexCare. The VA is not the only federal agency that's bad at a big bang tech deployment. So when you talk about an agency-wide solution that breaks down silos, anybody who's been around for a while probably rolls their eyes at us. What would intermediate sorts of technology be that could provide some solution while an agency-wide solution is underway?
Yeah, we've been a big proponent in working with other really large healthcare systems in the country and doing, scalable, strategically thought out proof of concepts in smaller fragments first, and then learning and scaling and iterating and adopting quickly. So I think one of the things the VA has for it is it does have the VISN network and the ability to kind of do proof of concepts in some of these smaller regional health systems, learn, iterate, and adopt, and then look to scale from there. We think that's the best way to do this stuff. That's how we've done it with Kaiser and some of these other really large healthcare systems. You do smaller proof of concepts, you learn the integration points that are important to move the needle. You begin with the end in mind and understanding the success metrics that are going to be important to drive this. And then you learn, iterate, and scale quickly from there with bottom down and top down support is the only way to kind of move these things. And at the same time, being very conscious of the providers as well. So all of the technology companies we built inside of large healthcare systems. And often cases, technology is only 50% of the problem. Understanding the provider and the change management and the amount of pressure that those folks are under to provide care and not being disruptive to their workflows and making their lives less efficient. You have to be very thoughtful about that, or none of this stuff is going to go anywhere. You can't just have tech for tech's sake. You have to understand the provider world and how provider interacts. And you have to be very purposeful in how you build these things out to scale from the bottom up over time.
One of the big points that you've emphasized is real-time access to care, especially for mental health services and especially in rural communities. Those are two big complicating aspects of the VA's network. How can the VA think about addressing those kinds of issues? Is it a technology solution? Is it a culture solution? How do they get on to real-time care, especially in mental health?
I think it's both. And I think the hard part is it's probably more culture than technology, but I don't know of a bigger issue for us to kind of rally around as a community to try to improve access to care for veterans than this. So when I transitioned from the service in 2004, the VA received roughly $21 billion to support its mission, and 17 men and women took their life every day to suicide. Friends, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives. Fast forward to 2024, the VA received $121 billion to support its mission, and that number is still the same. Roughly 17 men and women, brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters, took their lives to suicide. We've lost more people to suicide in the last 20 years than we did during the 9/11 era and supporting the 9/11 kind of ground on combat. So it's a crisis that's not talked about. We haven't really moved the needle on it, despite spending over $100 billion more to support the healthcare delivery mission of the VA. So it's clearly not just a technology issue, but not having, going back to your first question, Terry, not having the ability to share resources across the network and reduce time to care and make it easier for vets to find and get into services initially is a problem. I won't say that's the biggest problem, but that certainly doesn't help. So there's mental health services in the veteran community is a really complicated issue. You as a vet know it's not just about having access to care. It's, a big portion of people that need the care aren't even enrolled in the VA, and then there's a homeless population that's not enrolled in the VA. And how do you outreach and bring those folks in that need the help the most? So it's a complicated issue, but not being able to have one 24/7, 365 on-demand network that shares capacity across mental health services for the VA is an issue as well. And the technology issues are easier to address. We just got to have people that are willing to address them. The cultural issues and the stigmatism around, raising your hand for help is a harder issue to address, but it's just something we got to continue to talk about because it's a travesty that over 20 years, that number really hasn't moved despite putting, literally over $100 billion more at the overall global healthcare issue in the VA.
Well, you talked about capacity there, and certainly building out the community network of care is a big issue and a big initiative for VA. Are there issues on the community participant side of this so that community care providers don't understand the VA as much as the VA doesn't understand community care providers?
We're going to run out of time on your podcast. Yes. So that's to me, obviously selfishly, we want to help the VA as a technology company, but the importance of improving access to care for veterans is at the heart of everything that we're trying to do here. So the beauty of the VA to me, and mentioned I'm a third generation veteran, is it is a unique community. So when I first got out of the military, moved up to Seattle, it was a tough transition going from the military to the corporal. I didn't know anybody up here. My family, I grew up in Jersey, all my family was on the East Coast. And I would literally just go to the Seattle VA and hang out in the lobby and just talk to people that, had their Vietnam hat on. It's a community and a culture that's, should be protected in this institution, in this country. And some of the caregivers, we're talking about the technology piece here. These are some of the most mission-driven caregivers in the world. They can make more money outside the VA. They choose to work with this community and this provider network for a reason. So there is an understanding of that I think we need to protect, because there is a understanding of someone that's come back from deployment and has been through some serious high op tempo stuff that comes back, and you just get a different conversation with your primary care provider in the VA than somebody outside the VA. So I think there's that element that we have to protect. But there's also the element, frankly, that, as a veteran, I like the option to have choice to go outside the VA for services that they may not be expert in. So certainly, wound care, PTSD, that stuff I think should stay in the VA. But maybe I'm a former athlete and tore my knee up and can get into an ortho appointment outside the VA. I want to have that optionality, and some stuff like that. The history isn't as important at the veteran for some of those conditions, so have the optionality to go out there and do that is important. But what we're seeing, at least for some of the areas that we work with, is the community providers, one, they don't have a lot of excess capacity to share with the VA. Every health system is stretched to the gill. There's not a ton of health systems raising their hands saying, hey, we have providers sitting on their hands. It's 6 to 8 months to get into an ortho appointment in some of these large health systems as it is. So to have that capacity to share with the VA, one, is difficult. Some of those things I think are bigger deals than others, to your point of, should there be a continuum of care in the VA? I'd argue some services just do in the VA and some are easily sourced out. And then there's the whole issue of when they're sourced out, how do you manage the care gaps for the veteran? How do we close some of those care gaps as those services continue to rise and the disparate records continue to grow across the network?
I've been speaking with Sean O'Connor. He's a Navy veteran and co-founder and chief strategy officer at DexCare. Sean, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule and your device. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, a protest from a winner, A recent case shows why timing matters when challenging solicitation terms. But first, what individuals and businesses can expect when the tax filing window opens in just a few weeks. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As Congress catches up on its shutdown backlog, tax legislation is back in play. But now those conversations are under the shadow of an election year. Anna Taylor, managing principal of Deloitte's Tax Policy Group, joins us to break down what's realistic for year-end packages and the road ahead for tax policy. Ms. Taylor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
We're a few weeks past the longest lapse in federal appropriations and maybe looking at another one in the end of January. So I want to work with you to put October and November into context. You've seen many shutdowns in your time on the Hill and now at Deloitte. How would you say this one differs from previous episodes, especially when it comes to your area of expertise, tax policy?
Well, I do think it was different than what we've seen in years past. And part of that starts with just the way folks on the Hill operated in it. I was really shocked that my first sign that something was different was I was shocked when I heard reporting that folks had left, the members and the staff that work in the Capitol building had left before we even hit midnight the night that we entered the shutdown. That's not normal. In years past in shutdowns, you have frantic work happening behind the scenes where they're trying to see if there's any way to find a deal. And it was just obviously clear to all of them that they were so far away from a deal at that point that there was nothing to do. And so they left the building. And that was my first sign that this one was not normal and we were in for a longer shutdown. You know, in terms of the impact it has on tax administration and tax policy, you know, it's significant. The fact that you had so many furloughed workers in the federal workforce and specifically at IRS and in Treasury, you know, during that extended period definitely has an effect on customer service. It has an effect on their ability to move forward with their, reg writing and guidance plans. Which is in this moment, where we're just getting through a big piece of legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was signed into law back in the summer. And they're in, a very significant guidance process to go along with that bill right now. There's a lot of work that needs to get done, not to mention, which I know that, the Treasury and the IRS said much of that work went on during the shutdown. So I do think that there was some of that didn't stop, which is a good thing for taxpayers, but had to slow it down in some capacity. And when you think about just customer service for taxpayers and not being able to call and find somebody on the phone to talk to, certainly there were challenges there as well. So I do think there was that, kind of tangible direct effect. Now, in terms of effect on tax policy, I think the jury's still out. Obviously, there wasn't any sort of deal that ended the shutdown with additional legislation. So we didn't have some big tax package coming out of the, sometimes you do see some sort of legislative deal come out of not often with a shutdown. Normally nobody wins in a shutdown, but when you're reaching appropriations deals that don't end in shutdown, sometimes you'll see tax legislation attached to those kinds of deals. And, we didn't have that. There was no, there were not regular hearings and regular markups happening in the tax writing committees while we were in shutdown. And so there was probably a slowdown in some bills that are maybe under consideration because they weren't being considered during the shutdown. And so I do think that probably it definitely had a direct effect on taxpayers who may have had an impact on customer service, but there's also that effect of maybe slowing down policymaking as well.
I'm speaking with Anna Taylor. She's managing principal of the Tax Policy Group at Deloitte. Well, let's talk about the specific impact on taxpayers. I mean, filing season is going to open in just a few weeks. Is there a reasonable expectation that the IRS and all of the companies that support tax filing will have written in the rules for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act provisions and anything else that might come up before the year end? Are tax filers going to have the systems ready to go?
Well, I think that the Treasury and IRS have done they've made a real effort to try to get to the things from that bill first that were going to need to be implemented for taxpayers at the beginning of 2026. So I think in most cases, you have seen, you've already seen guidance come out on those things that are affecting individual taxpayers, like, tipped, the tipped income deduction and overtime pay, things like that. So they have already put out quite a bit of guidance in those spaces that will have a direct effect on individual taxpayers. There's still a lot to go, though. And, you have business taxpayers who maybe aren't filing on the same, timeline as individuals. Some of that important guidance is still yet to come. But I do think that because of the thinking about the kind of end year for individuals, the administration has tried to prioritize those things that are going to need to be known on day one of the new year.
That's good to hear. You also mentioned the congressional tax writing committees, and certainly as Congress has come back, the committees have quite a backlog. Can you give us any insight as to what they may be talking about in those committees?
Well, they do have a full agenda. I mean, I think the first thing that you're hearing a lot about if you turn on any news outlet right now is, of course, the thing that landed them in the shutdown to begin with, finding some sort of path forward on those Affordable Care Act premium tax credit, the enhancements for those credits. They didn't reach any deal before they came out of the shutdown, but they did agree to keep working on it. So there was an agreement as part of coming out of that shutdown where Majority Leader Thune in the Senate said he will hold another round of votes on those credit extensions by the middle of December. So I do think that there's conversations happening, both bipartisan and partisan, to see if there's a path forward on figuring out a way to deal with healthcare costs and insurance premium costs. So that's taking up a lot of time right now. In addition to that, there is interest from the committees to try to move some things that they've been working on for a while on a bipartisan basis. These are things that have been in works for years, honestly, and have pretty broad consensus support. Things like, there's a tax treaty with Taiwan that has moved through regular order in both the House and the Senate that I think people would like to see get over the finish line. There is the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee have worked on they haven't actually processed legislation, but they've put out a joint white paper on tax administration. So just some changes to make the system work better for taxpayers. I think that's something they're interested in trying to see if there's opportunities to move together. And then there are a few expiring tax provisions on the business side of the ledger that haven't been dealt with this year. A lot of the expiring provisions on the individual side were included in that One Big Beautiful Bill Act back in the summer. But there are a couple of provisions like the work opportunity tax credit. That's an important one that does have an effect on, people's ability to get a job and on businesses' ability to hire. And so that's one that is set to expire at the end of this year that I do think there's probably bipartisan interest in extending. So those are all things I think on the near term agenda if they're in an environment to be able to move some bipartisan legislation. And we all know right now that's a big if.
Well, speaking of that environment, 2026 is an election year for many members of Congress. Do you think in that environment they really will be able to move some of these big pieces of tax legislation, or will they maybe just nibble around the edges?
It's a really good question. And I definitely don't, when I look in my crystal ball, it's cloudy. I think that there is, even in the most political of times, you can sometimes get smaller packages of bipartisan consensus product through. So, I'm still hopeful that they can. They're going to have to do something on appropriations again when they get to the end of January. That's when that next, government funding deadline will be reached. And so there is potentially a bipartisan vehicle that will be heading our way come late January assuming we're not headed towards another shutdown at that point. And so I really do think there's a possibility that if they reach some sort of funding deal, as they're working through it in December and into January, that there's the potential that you could see some tax legislation move along with it, possibly. The later, I think this goes without saying, the later you get into an election year, the harder it is to do bipartisan things. So when we get into, maybe late summer, early fall, I'll stop being as optimistic. But until then, I think that there's still a chance they could move some of the smaller consensus items.
I've been speaking with Anna Taylor. She's managing principal in the tax policy group at Deloitte. Anna, thank you for joining me, and I do appreciate your optimism.
Thanks.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, a protest from a winner. A recent case shows why timing matters when challenging solicitation terms. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Court of Federal Claims rejected a post-award protest from Active Deployment Systems. They argued ICE awarded too many IDIQ contracts for detention services. The decision underscores that disputes over solicitation language and pricing structures must be raised before bidding, not after award. Zach Prince, partner at Haynes Boone, explains what lessons we can take from this case. Zach, it's great to have you here this morning.
Great to be here, Terry.
You've got an interesting story about a protest this morning from a company who actually won the bid. Tell us about that.
Sure. So this involved a Department of Homeland Security procurement from ICE for detention services for folks detained for immigration law violations. So protester here is a company, Active Deployment Systems. They're a Texas-based company that markets itself as specializing in rapidly deploying and operating temporary facilities. So exactly what ICE is looking for this procurement. So ICE said that they were going to be issuing 5 or more IDIQ contracts, and then task orders would be competed for particular tasks. Each of the offerers would bid on only those types of tasks that they want to be considered for going forward. ADS, Active Deployment Systems, they received an award, but they were one of 42 offers that received the award. And you get the sense reading the protest that they don't like the fact they're competing now with slightly fewer than they were competing with for the IDIQ award, but not many. So it's still going to be big competitions going forward. Maybe they're trying to level or eliminate some of those competitors.
So this was an IDIQ contract, right? What does this tell us about the structure of these? Was ADS's expectation reasonable in terms of the number of winners that they would have?
No. And in fact, this is happening pretty commonly, where agencies have these very large IDIQ awards that they might issue 50, 100 plus individual IDIQs. That it does narrow the playing field a little bit going forward, but what it really does for the agency is speed along the competition for that next stage when they actually have the identifiable requirements that they're going to have bids on.
And you can kind of understand ADS's perspective, I guess. The fewer the competitors on, or the fewer the awardees on the actual contract, the more likelihood they have of winning those orders and the higher their revenue might be. So their projections might have been off a little.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think the better arguments that they had here, and maybe their real concern was about the price structure of this IDIQ. But the problem was that they raised these challenges while also submitting a bid for a contract they received, right? So to tell you a little bit more about that, for each of the objectives that you could bid on for this IDIQ, there was a set pricing volume that contained the government's independent government estimate for what prices should be to be fair and reasonable. Among those estimates was a hard cap, essentially a hard cap, on prices per bed, per detainee. ADS argued that this harms them if they're stuck with this because it might put them in a losing position going forward for the actual task orders.
So the court kind of said that, well, the time to challenge that is not after you've won, but before you've won, right?
Yeah, that's right. And they did try to give ADS credit. They challenged this at the agency level in agency level protests, but agency level protests don't actually stop anything. they just tell the agency, hey, we think this is unworkable, you're hoping the agency looks at it and says, oh yeah, you're right. But here they didn't. So, ADS took a contract based on this price structure that they think is improper. And as the court noted, they don't have to bid on any task orders. So if they really think that this is a losing proposition for them, first of all, they shouldn't have bid on the contract. And the same thing is true for the 50-something other offerors. But now they don't have to take losing contracts. They can do the analysis on a task order basis and say, we don't want to be part of this. Whether it's good business for the agency, maybe not. But I think the agency was moving quickly and just wants to get this thing done for urgent needs to be fulfilled.
I'm speaking with Zach Prince. He's a partner at Haynes Boone. So we talked a little bit about ICE's strategy, and you're seeing this more often in these IDIQs where agencies will bring on a lot of winners and then use this as a means to simplify later competition.
Yeah, we are seeing quite a lot of this, and I think there are a couple reasons for it. One is perhaps strategically from a protest perspective, that if you just issue contracts essentially to everyone who submitted a reasonably responsive offer, then you're limiting the IDIQ level protests, which generally can be heard at various forums, Court of Federal Claims, GAO. Maybe then you could have protests of the task order competitions, but those are limited only to GAO and only when they're above certain dollar values. So the protest possibility becomes much more limited. You also can only have protests for whoever bid on the initial IDIQ or from whoever bid on the initial IDIQ. So that it might be a management of protest strategy. It might just be because if you can get a framework in place from the agency that has the pricing mechanisms and the ordering mechanisms, it makes it a lot faster to buy what you need later on.
So do you take any lessons from this particular protest resolution on how the court views these kind of arguments?
Yeah, I think in general, even if you haven't waived an argument because you didn't bring it up before, which it usually is the case, that is, if you submit a proposal and you have arguments that the solicitation was ambiguous or otherwise flawed, you can't then complain later. That's not always the case if you've launched agency level protests like ADS did here, or there's some other exception. But you really can't have your cake and eat it too in this regard. And contractors are in a tough position because you don't want to be kicked out of competition for choosing not to bid. You don't want to annoy the customer by protesting, perhaps unnecessarily in advance. But if you don't have clarity on terms, or you're going to have to accept terms you don't like, the protest mechanism is what's there for you.
Then should contractors change the way they approach these large IDIQs? Is there a different competition strategy that they should be employing to be more competitive going forward?
I don't think there really is, unfortunately. I think I have this conversation with clients all the time where there is a very ambiguous RFP, RFQ. I don't know what it means. The agency won't respond to questions, and it makes a significant difference for the business on how they put their proposal together. But if they don't bid, then they're totally out of the game. If they bid making assumptions that prove to be unwarranted because the agency thinks it means something else, they might take a loss. So they could protest and annoy the customer and potentially delay the procurement. They can't always protest because the protest rights are not so sweeping. And it also costs a lot of money. Or they just proceed and hope for the best.
Or as the court told ADS, don't take an order.
Yeah, that's right. And I think ADS is likely going to take orders. And that was what they told the court. They want to keep this contract.
This is an interesting case, Zach. Thanks for sharing it with us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Terry.
Zach Prince is a partner at Haynes Boone. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Up next, the top national headlines from CBS News and the Federal Newscast. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.
And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton. sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, December 5th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I am glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, what individuals and businesses can expect when the tax filing window opens in just a few weeks. Plus, the VA's size and complexity may be keeping top tech minds away, and veterans pay the price. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The State Department's diplomatic workforce is feeling overburdened, under-resourced, and more likely to leave in the next few years. That's according to a recent survey from the American Foreign Service Association. The State Department conducted widespread layoffs this year. It also closed and consolidated hundreds of offices as part of an agency reorganization. And Foreign Service officers say they're spread thin because of these changes. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman has more. Jory, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Tell us about the American Foreign Service Association survey. Why did they conduct it and why now?
AFSA conducted this survey because they feel that Foreign Service officers have not had the opportunity to give this feedback to agency leadership. And that's all because, as we reported earlier this summer, the Trump administration is not conducting the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey this year. They are not doing that government-wide. That has been a reliable indicator of how federal employees feel about their agencies and whether they report high or low morale. And in the absence of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, this union, AFSA, is stepping in and providing this data on their own.
What were some of the key takeaways in their findings?
Yeah, so really across the board here, a real feeling of concern with recent changes at the State Department. The survey, they heard from more than 2,100 Foreign Service officers still in active duty, still at the department, and 98% of these respondents reported reduced morale this year. That's nearly everyone who responded to the survey. That's concerning there. And then 86% of respondents said that workplace changes since January have affected their ability to advance U.S. diplomatic priorities, impacted in not a good way, a negative impact on where things are going. Nearly a third of survey respondents said that they have since changed their career plans since the beginning of this year. The Foreign Service is an up and out kind of system where once you join, you typically stay for the long haul. You make a career out of it. You stay for decades at a time. More than 80% of respondents said they entered the Foreign Service intending to stick around for about 20 years or more. But now 22% of respondents say they plan to leave the department within the next year or two. This is really something that AFSA is sounding the alarm on. AFSA's president, John Dinkelman, said that these results amount to a workplace crisis and that it's going to take years, if not decades, to reverse the impact of what's been going on this year.
When we undermine the Foreign Service, we undermine America's ability to prevent conflict, support our allies, and protect our citizens abroad. In short, we weaken our global leadership.
Jory, what has the State Department said about the survey? Have they made any comment?
Yeah, so a State Department spokesperson did say that Secretary of State Marco Rubio values these candid insights from individuals who are trying to serve their country. One thing that the spokesperson did say, though, is that what the department will not tolerate is people using their positions to actively undermine the duly elected president's priorities and objectives. And we have seen this year the State Department take some changes to how they vet incoming Foreign Service officers. One thing that has changed is they have now added a criteria that they say focuses on fidelity to the administration's priorities as a criteria for whether folks in the Foreign Service get promotions or not. And they've also changed around the Foreign Service officer test, the entry-level test that folks take to join the Foreign Service. And so they've amid all these workforce cuts, they have been taking steps to ensure that people that adhere to the administration's priorities are now joining the Foreign Service.
Jory, just remind us overall, how big are the cuts that the State Department experienced over the course of this last year, and what's feeding into all of these responses?
This summer, the State Department laid off about 1,300 employees overall. The majority of those cuts impacted the civil service workforce, so folks who don't go overseas typically. And meanwhile, there's also been some impact to the Foreign Service. About 250 Foreign Service officers were also impacted by those rifts. And this Friday, they will officially separate from the department. That will be the last wave of those rifts that will be finalized. And so when you do all the math here, the State Department, the Foreign Service, they had about 1,700 active duty officers before the Trump administration began. And AFSA estimates nearly 25% of that workforce is now gone. About 4,000 Foreign Service individuals have left the department this year through layoffs and through voluntary incentives like the Deferred Resignation Program and retirements.
What impact does all of that have on the diplomatic mission? Are they able to document it or quantify it at this point?
So survey respondents did pretty significantly respond to the idea that they are spread thin, that they have fewer individuals doing the mission. One thing that also contributed to that was a government-wide hiring freeze that was in effect for much of this year through mid-October. And what we heard from Rohit Nepal, who's AFSA's vice president for the State Department, he said that active duty Foreign Service officers have been spread thin. He recalled his last active duty post in Amman, Jordan, that they were also impacted by the hiring freeze. And that is, of course, a zone that has seen a lot of geopolitical conflict recently.
We found ourselves unable to hire even while we were dealing with an exchange of regular Iranian missile exchanges over Jordanian skies during the Israel-Iran war. This hiring bar included some of the very people that we were relying on to keep the embassy community safe during an incredibly dangerous time.
It's pretty impactful. What does AFSA hope happens as a result of publishing the survey data?
They're hopeful that Congress steps in all of this, that they play a more active role in how the State Department manages its workforce. And they really hope that folks in Congress make sure that State Department doesn't get rid of key individuals, doesn't get rid of key talent that is necessary to advance this diplomatic mission. Senator Chris Van Hollen, who does play an active role in the Foreign Service work of Congress, did put out a statement raising concerns about the AFSA survey. We'll likely hear from other lawmakers as in response to this survey data as well. And it's been a tough year for the State Department and, of course, related agencies like USAID and the Voice of America are things that are relevant to the State Department's mission as well. And they've also, of course, gone through very significant cuts. USAID has been shuttered, of course.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for bringing us this information.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the VA's size and complexity may be keeping top tech minds away, and veterans pay the price. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.